All right, so we left off yesterday or the day before talking about Thomas Jefferson's mistake with regards to putting in the Embargo Act. This was his response to the Chesapeake affair, but unfortunately our economy was not strong enough to withstand this Embargo Act. Obviously, it made citizens very angry. He grew very unpopular at the end of his administration. He does correct the mistake by doing the Non-Intercourse Act, and he goes ahead and opens up European trade, but he does not open it up with Britain and France. He holds off on that, and then he leaves office. So now James Madison has taken office in 1808, and he becomes our fourth president of the United States. You guys, I've mentioned before in the last time we did the video that James Madison was not a popular person on the foreign affairs. He was not a foreign diplomat. He had not been sent across like Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson. So he had a little bit different of a stance, and it's going to be the reason why he's willing to go to war. Okay? Think about it. George Washington, having been at war, he knew it was not wise to go to war. John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, knowing the diplomacy of it all and understanding the condition of our military and our finances, they held off war. This is a common practice. You're going to see us go through, we're going to have an issue come up in American history that in some cases it's going to be several presidents before the situation comes to a boil. We know that the impressment was a long-standing problem. Washington had to deal with impressment. All of the presidents had to deal with it, but they found band-aids to put over the situation because we were not in a position to do anything but kind of endure the bullying of the larger nations. So now we come to a point where now James Madison, who has not been a diplomat, now he has an extensive political career. He is obviously the father of our Constitution, and so he has political experience, but just not on the foreign affairs. So he offers to open up trade with France and Britain as long as they would guarantee that American ships would be safe. And I brought this out in the last time we did the lecture, that yes, Bonaparte lifts the Berlin Decrees, but then they pass a third order that causes for the seizure of American ships in French ports. Because remember that we had the Order of Council passed by Britain saying that any ships doing trade with European powers, they had to be stopped and they had to be searched. And if they didn't, then they would be the action would be taken against them. And then you had France, who then passed the Berlin and Milan decrees and basically said, if you're going to comply with the British rules, well, then we're going to attack you. And Bonaparte does a turnabout, and even though he quote-unquote lifts the Berlin and Milan decrees, then he passes another one that again puts our American ships in danger. But the interesting thing is we never actually do battle with Bonaparte. Again, I think that comes down to shrewdness, because he would still have been able to take us if we would have provoked him. So we have this problem going on the foreign front. We still can't get to the level of imports and exports we once had, but now we have problems on the Indian front. The Indian attacks increase in Indiana due to, again, poor treaties. Again, we're not treating the Indians fairly. They're getting fed up with it, and so they are doing what they know best, and that is to attack. Okay, I'm going to move the screen up to see. All right. These poor treaties cheated the Indians out of what was rightfully theirs. And like I said, you can kick a dog only so many times, and then the dog is going to bite back, and that's exactly what happened. Again, the downside to this is that the Indians were ill prepared for war against us. So if you think think of the irony. We're ill-prepared to go to war with Britain and France, and the Indians are ill-prepared to go to battle with us. And sure enough, we do have an Indian leader by the name of Tecumseh who, rallies his people. He's from the Shawnee tribe, and he actually establishes a town. He unifies them. The prophet, his brother, he kind of provides the spiritual leadership, and he's telling everyone that the Great Spirit is behind them and that this is going to be a successful venture. And lo and behold, they're supported by the British. Now, we've tried to get the British out of North America multiple times. You have the Treaty of Paris that says get out. You have the Jay Treaty that says get out underneath Washington. Then you have Jefferson sending Zebulon Pike into the territory and saying, hey, guess what? We own this and you need to get out. And guess what? The British still do not comply. They continue to provide guns, gunpowder, and just overall encouragement to cause problems with our settlers, and they end up causing great problems out on the Indiana territory. So again, this kind of also has a spiritual application. If you remember when Israel came in and God said, I'm giving you this land. Now, God never said to us, I'm giving you this land. Did he open the doors? Yes. Did we have success where we most likely should not have had success? Yes. But in Israel's case, he sends them to Canaan and says, guess what? You need to take this, and you need to take it from everyone. And when I tell you to go and I want you to wipe out a nation, you had to trust God that he had a good reason for giving an order to go to war. And when he said go to war, he didn't say, hey, go and defeat them. He said, go and wipe them off the face of the planet. So that has to tell you that those nations were doing things so bad in God's eyes that he realized what a cancer they were going to be to his people, and he wanted that cancer eradicated. And we see through our study of the Bible that Israel does not take this. Israel decides not to follow that, and what ends up happening? They fall into a very destructive pattern of constantly going after the other lifestyles of these nations that were allowed to stay in Canaan. And we see here that the same thing applies. We trusted the British at their word. Obviously, it didn't mean anything. We did not take any further action to make sure that they actually left. And so they were allowed to continue to be a cancer in our country. So the American, now underneath James Madison, he does take decisive action, just like other presidents when it came to the Indians, because again, this was a battle we could win. Indians did not have the ability to maintain their numbers. Between fighting between themselves and fighting with us, the number of their warriors depleted exponentially, because they were always rather than using diplomacy like Washington and John Adams did, their first answer was always to attack. So William Henry Harrison is sent, and he defeats both Tecumseh and the prophet at the Battle of Tippecanoe. Now, we're not going to get to his presidency in this school year, which is sad, but he's going to use this victory to propel himself into a presidency that is very, very short-lived. His campaign slogan is going to be Tippecanoe and Tyler too. So that is because he's going to want people to remember that he was the victor over the Indians at this battle. So now we, obviously the British continue to be a pain to us in the frontier. They're still continuing to be a pain to us on the oceans. and we end up going into the War of 1812. So capital letter A, the Warhawks. Now remember that whenever one of Britain or France would insult us, there was a group of men in Congress that constantly called for war. And it was because of the shrewdness of our presidents that we did not actually do that. I mean, the closest we came was when John Adams called Washington back. We went into a minor quasi-war with France, and then that ended. Outside of that, the war cries of these representatives went on deaf ears. However, their cry gets louder and louder as more and more things continue to be done to our country that are insulting. And they have a leader. His name is Henry Clay. And because and these are representatives, these are not senators. And because he was the leader of them, they elected him as Speaker of the House. Capital letter B, the declaration of war. The Britain continues to torture us through blockades and impressment. And I spelled impressment wrong, so hold on. There we go. And Madison asks Britain to, relieve the orders of council, which required American ships to be searched by British Navy in order to make sure they weren't trading with their enemies. But Britain does not. And then eventually it does comply. But remember, we've talked about this before, there's a poor communication method. When it happens, and you're going to see this in the War of 1812, because on your quiz, I asked you about the Battle of New Orleans. Did anyone actually, I'm going to assume that nobody actually read the pages, but did anyone actually read the pages? There's something interesting about the Battle of New Orleans, that it's the greatest American victory in American history, or in this battle of the War of 1812. But if you read the book, you would have found out something interesting about that battle that kind of goes to this point number 3. Okay, so Britain agrees, but they have ships all over the ocean. Again, they don't have radios, they don't have walkie-talkies. So the British commanders continued to assail our ships, and they continued to do what they knew to be the will of the king. However, they did not know that Britain had agreed not to no longer torture our ships on the sea. And so the U.S. said, hey, wait a minute, you said you were going to stop. Britain said we did. America said, but your guys are not stopping, so guess what? We're going to go to war. So if people would have realized that basically how poorly the communication was, if that had been a thought process, we might not have been in the War of 1812. But because Britain could not communicate with its captains to say, hey, stop attacking American ships, if it could have communicated immediately with the British that were still in North America and said, stop inciting the Indians to attack, and so on, maybe we would have escaped this war, but that is not what happened. And in a way, I believe that this, again, God allowed it to happen, and God does bring some good things out of it. So the War of 1812 lasts for about 2.5 years. And when we go into war, we have some handicaps. First off, Thomas Jefferson, he downsized our Army and Navy, and that's never a good thing. I'm sorry, I'm very pro-American, so when I see, a president who decides that they're going to, Bill Clinton did it during his administration, he cut funding to a lot of military bases, many military bases closed, and it just puts us in a really, really bad position when our military is cut. So we have a very poor, inadequate Army and Navy, and so therefore we're once again not prepared to go to war. Okay, again, Congress does not have the finances in order to fund the war. So our problems really have not changed, and in fact, because of Thomas Jefferson, they're a little bit worse. Because you got to figure that between the downsizing of the Army and the Embargo Act, we all suffered financially.